Chapter 9, Introductions and Conclusions. When thinking about the speech development process, and a lot of times you'll start with the body of your speech and you'll develop that and you'll have all the main points and the research that you want. Then you go back to the introduction and conclusion. And remember that those are very important parts. It's how you start and how you end things with your audience. So let's start talking about introductions. So there's a few functions of introductions, 4 to be exact. The first is to get the attention of the audience. The second is to establish credibility. The third is to state your thesis. And the fourth is to preview your main points. And they should pretty much be done in this order. So think about this. A lot of students tend to think that they start their speech with their thesis statement, but that's not the case. You start your speech with an attention device to get the attention of the audience, to pull your audience in. And then you talk about why you're credible to speak about this topic. And that could be because it's something that's happened to you, it's something that you've studied, it's something that's impacted your life in some way. And then you get to the thesis and you clearly say, in this presentation, I'm going to tell you about blank. And then you preview your main points. So we're going to talk about these processes as we continue. So attention getting strategies. You could tell a story. Again, it needs to be brief. It shouldn't be a long story. You can reference occasion, not necessarily appropriate for our course. But if you're asked to speak at a banquet of some sort, you might start off with, I want to first thank you all for the opportunity to speak here tonight. You can reference a current event or historical event. If applicable, refer to a speech prior to yours. Again, not appropriate for this class. Description of a personal interest of yours. I think these are the most impactful can be a startling statement or statistic, especially if it's a persuasive or informative speech, where you start with something like 85% of Americans are impacted by blank. Give them a number that is really powerful and then right off the bat tells them why it's important that they listen to you. An analogy is always a good way to start. Anything like a story or a personal experience or an analogy, those things draw in your audience and it makes it relatable to them. A quote. We quote people because number one, they're either famous, they're educated, they're accomplished in some way, and they've said something in a very clear, simple manner that we wouldn't necessarily think of. So for example, if I were to give a speech on community service, I would start with John F. Kennedy stated, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." It's concise, it gets the point across, and it could quickly flow to a speech on community service. A rhetorical question is a question that doesn't require an answer, but it's meant to be thought-provoking. It's another option. And humor. Now, you have to be careful with humor. The humor needs to be appropriate in general, appropriate for the occasion, and appropriate for your topic. Not all topics should begin with humor. Additionally, you also want to make sure it's funny. Just because you think it's funny doesn't mean anyone else will. So test it out to make sure others believe that it's funny. On top of that, you just don't want to start your speech with something you think is hilarious, but no one responds and crickets are chirping in the background. So just make sure it's appropriate and it's humorous. So, consider preparing your introduction last. This may help you come up with the most effective attention getter. The body of your speech will drive what needs to be said in the intro to prepare your audience for what is to come. So, to think really quickly about the introduction, you would have your attention getter. You would use an attention device of some sort. I believe in my sample presentation for migraines, I have a visual up and it talks about, have you ever felt like there's a knife going through your eye? Have you ever felt like there's lightning bolts going through your head? Have you ever felt so sick and your head hurts so bad that you only could lay still in darkness to get any relief? If you've had any of those things, then you have experienced a migraine. I myself have had migraines for 25 years. It has impacted my life, and I've spent a lot of time understanding what they are. As I continue, I'm going to tell you about migraines. I'm going to tell you about the causes of migraines, the types of migraines, and possible treatments. So there's a quick introduction that does an attention getter, states credibility, states thesis, and previews main points. So functions of conclusions. The first function is the brake light function. You prepare your audience for the fact that you're about to stop. Sometimes students forget their conclusion, and so they just abruptly sit down, and we don't realize that they're ending, and it can be a little awkward. Think about movies you've ever seen that ended quickly, and you're like, wait a minute, I just got into it. I can't believe that's how it ended. Or that didn't wrap up anything. That didn't answer any of my questions. It just stopped. And so we don't want that to happen with our presentations. So you would cue your audience that you're about to conclude with something simple like saying, in conclusion. In conclusion, today we have discussed migraines. You kind of want to make sure that your audience is motivated positively towards you and the topic that you've been presenting. So you would say, in conclusion, today I've told you about migraines. I've told you about their causes, their types, and their treatments. And then you would end with some sort of clincher. Sometimes this can be a variation of what you did in your introduction. Sometimes students start a story in the introduction and they finish it in the conclusion. If you're giving a persuasive speech, then you might leave the audience with an appeal or a challenge. So for instance, let's say you've given a persuasive speech why it's important to go vote. So your last statement may be, I challenge you that in the next local, state, or federal election that you go out and you vote and you make sure that your voice is heard in our democracy. So it'd be a call to action at the very end. So introductions and conclusions have a few purposes, but they're simple, but they help make sure that you start in a way that your audience knows exactly what's coming and that you end in a way that your audience feels like it's complete and feels like it's a complete rounded out presentation where there's no question about what you said and there's no question about where you were going and what they want you to do at the end of the speech. Composing the conclusion, it should match the introduction. Conclusion should be no more than 10% of your total speaking time. It should be polished. It should leave a lasting impression. Sometimes I find that in conclusions, students ramble quite a bit. They haven't really thought about their conclusion. They got everything else done, and they were saving that to the last minute. Try not to present new information in the conclusion. So you should only just kind of recap what you've already told them about. I hope this helps you with the presentation process. It's important, again, I would always begin developing the body of your speech, have your main points, and then let that kind of guide how you want to begin and end the speech to make sure that they bookend well all the great information you're sharing with the audience in the middle.